Tonight, if your throat feels a little sore, you'll reach for a pill. You'll swallow it without thinking. Within an hour, the ache will start to fade. But for almost the entire span of human existence, that same sore throat could kill you in a week. No pill, no doctor with an answer, just you, your body, and whatever your tribe believed was hunting you from the inside. That's the real story of sickness, not the version with hospitals and antibiotics, the other version. The one that shaped almost everything about how you think, how you fear, and even how your immune system behaves right now, in this exact moment, without you noticing. Let's go back. Not centuries, tens of thousands of years. Picture a small group of early humans, maybe 30 people, moving together across a landscape with no maps and no walls. One morning, someone doesn't get up. Their skin is hot. Their eyes are glassy. They're shivering even though the sun is already warm. Nobody in that group knows what a virus is. Nobody knows what a bacterium is. They only know one thing for certain. Something invisible has entered their friend, and it might be able to jump. That fear wasn't irrational. It was survival math. Paleopathologist Tony Waldron, who spent decades studying disease in ancient skeletons, has shown that infections like tuberculosis and leprosy left visible scars on bone long before written history existed. These weren't rare events. They were constant background noise in the human story. A sick person wasn't just suffering. They were a walking question mark the entire group had to answer immediately. Do we help them? Do we isolate them? Do we leave? Here's what's strange. Long before germ theory, before anyone understood what a pathogen even was, humans across wildly different cultures independently invented the same instinct: separation. Sick individuals were moved to the edge of camp, given their own fire, fed by someone standing at a distance. This wasn't cruelty. It was an unconscious inherited behavior, the same one that makes you flinch today when a coworker sneezes without covering their mouth. Evolutionary biologists call this the behavioral immune system, a term popularized by researcher Mark Schaller, describing a set of instincts that evolved specifically to detect and avoid disease before your actual immune system ever gets involved. Think about that for a second. Your body built a second immune system, one made entirely of feelings: disgust, suspicion, the urge to step back from someone coughing. None of that is random. It's ancient software, still running in your brain, thousands of generations later. But avoidance could only do so much. Eventually, someone in every group got sick anyway. And that's when the real ancient medicine began. Not with pills, with pattern recognition. Early humans watched. They noticed that certain plants seemed to calm a fever, that chewing on willow bark eased pain. Modern chemists later discovered why. Willow bark contains a compound related to salicylic acid, the same active ingredient found in aspirin today. Your headache medicine has prehistoric roots. The people who first chewed that bark had no concept of chemistry. They just noticed something worked, and they remembered it. Then they told someone else, and that person told someone else. That's it. That's the entire foundation of ancient medicine: observation, memory, word of mouth. No labs, no peer review, just generation after generation quietly refining a list of what helps and what doesn't. Now here's where it gets darker and stranger. When the plant remedies failed, and they often did, ancient people didn't conclude that medicine had limits. They concluded that something unseen was responsible: a curse, an angry spirit, a punishment from an ancestor. If your body is fighting something invisible and you have no microscope, the most logical explanation isn't biology. It's a hidden will. Something is doing this to you on purpose. This is where healers, shamans, and priests entered the picture, not as separate from medicine, but as the emotional half of it. Archaeological evidence from sites in South America and Central Europe shows skulls with small, precise holes drilled into them, a practice called trepanation. For years, this looked purely ritualistic, but researchers studying these skulls found something remarkable. Many patients survived the procedure, sometimes more than once. Bone had regrown around the edges of the hole, proof of healing, proof of life continuing afterward. Why would ancient healers drill into a living human skull? One theory, widely discussed by anthropologists studying ancient trauma medicine, is that it was used to relieve pressure after head injuries, swelling that we now understand in modern neurology but that ancient healers understood only through observed outcome. Someone with a swollen head, drilled and released, sometimes got better. So they did it again and again, not because they understood the brain, because they understood results. This pattern repeats across every early civilization you can name: Egypt, Mesopotamia, ancient China. Each developed its own medical systems, often centuries before contact with one another, and each independently arrived at oddly similar conclusions. Balance matters, diet matters, isolation of the sick matters. Cleanliness, even in cultures with no concept of bacteria, was treated as sacred. And then there's Ötzi. In 1991, hikers found a 5,000-year-old body preserved in ice along the Italian Alps border. Researcher Albert Zink, who led extensive studies on the mummy known as Ötzi, discovered something that changes the entire picture of ancient sickness. Ötzi's body carried evidence of Lyme disease, the earliest known case in human history. He also had whipworm eggs in his intestines and signs of joint deterioration likely worsened by chronic infection. In other words, one of the best preserved humans from the ancient world was, quite literally, riddled with illness the entire time. He wasn't an outlier. He was normal. Sickness wasn't an event that happened to ancient humans occasionally. It was the constant background hum of being alive. That single fact reframes almost everything. You picture ancient humans as tough, resilient, untouched by modern fragility. The truth is closer to the opposite. They were sick more often, healed less completely, and simply learned to function inside that reality because they had no other option. Which brings us to something even more unsettling. Disease didn't just shape individuals, it shaped entire societies. Paleodemographer Sharon DeWitt has spent years studying skeletal remains from the Black Death in medieval Europe, and her research reveals something counterintuitive. The plague didn't just kill randomly, it disproportionately killed people who were already weakened by earlier illness or poor nutrition, while sparing others who had, in effect, been hardened by prior sickness. Survival wasn't only about luck. It was shaped by a lifetime of invisible battles fought earlier, battles that left the body either more resilient or more vulnerable. That means the plague, the ancient world's most feared event, was partly writing the outcome of a story that had already started years earlier, in childhood, in nutrition, in every prior fever survived or lost. Sit with that for a second. Every illness you get today still runs on inherited biological logic shaped by millennia of exactly this kind of filtering. Fever isn't a malfunction. Evolutionary theorist Randolph Nesse has argued convincingly that fever is a defense mechanism, your body deliberately raising its own temperature to make itself a worse environment for invading pathogens. Ancient humans experienced this and had no idea why it was happening. They just knew that a fever, however miserable, sometimes meant survival, and its absence sometimes meant something worse. They didn't need a name for it. Their bodies already knew. So when you feel that first ache of a cold coming on, and you instinctively pull away from other people, when you feel that flash of disgust looking at spoiled food, when your body burns hot during illness, even though it makes you miserable, none of that is new. None of that is modern. You're not experiencing sickness with 21st century biology. You're experiencing it with tens of thousands of years of inherited defense, refined by every ancestor who avoided the sick, survived the fever, chewed the right bark, and passed the pattern forward. There's another layer to this that rarely gets told. Sickness didn't just shape instinct, it shaped belief systems, entire religions, entire social orders. If you were an ancient person watching your neighbor die of something invisible while you stayed untouched, you needed an explanation. Randomness wasn't comforting. Randomness felt dangerous, unpredictable, unbearable. So almost every early culture built a framework where illness meant something. You were being punished. You were being tested. You had broken a rule you didn't know existed. This is why so many ancient healing rituals blended medicine with confession. In parts of ancient Mesopotamia, a sick person wasn't just given herbs. They were asked what they had done wrong. Priests would question them about broken oaths, disrespected elders, forgotten offerings. It sounds superstitious now, but functionally, it served a purpose. It gave the sick person a narrative, a reason, something to fix. even if the actual fix was irrelevant to the biology of the illness itself. The mind, it turns out, needed treatment almost as urgently as the body did. And there's a reason that mattered so much. Chronic, unexplained stress weakens the immune system. Modern research on the mind-body connection has repeatedly shown that people under intense psychological strain heal slower and fall ill more often. So in a strange, indirect way, those ancient rituals of confession and explanation may have done something real. Not by curing infection, by calming the nervous system enough to give the body a fighting chance. Now think about children. In a world before vaccines, before clean water systems, before any understanding of contamination, childhood itself was a gauntlet. Historical mortality estimates suggest that in many ancient populations, a significant portion of children didn't survive past their early years, often due to illnesses that today would be treated with a single visit to a clinic. Parents didn't parent the way you might expect. Many ancient cultures delayed naming children, sometimes for months, an emotional buffer against a loss that was tragically common. That single detail tells you everything about how constant sickness really was. Entire cultural customs were built around the expectation that a child might not make it. This is hard to sit with, but it explains something you carry today without realizing it. Your instinct to worry intensely when a child has a fever isn't just modern parental anxiety. It's inherited vigilance, shaped by thousands of years where that fear was fully justified, where a fever really could be the difference between a long life and a short one. Even burial practices reveal how deeply disease shaped ancient life. Archaeologists have found mass graves dated to periods of widespread illness, bodies buried in haste, sometimes without the usual rituals given to the dead. That absence of ceremony wasn't disrespect, it was fear. When disease moved through a population quickly, the living had to choose between honoring the dead properly and protecting themselves from whatever had killed them. Survival won. It almost always does. What's remarkable is how much of this ancient logic still holds up under modern scrutiny. The instinct to isolate the sick, formalized today as quarantine, is a word that comes from a much later period in history. But the practice itself is ancient, older than written language. The instinct to observe which remedies work and repeat them is, in its rawest form, the ancestor of the entire scientific method. The instinct to find meaning in suffering is still very much alive in you, whether you notice it or not. When you get sick today, some small part of you still asks why, even if you consciously know the answer is a virus, not a curse. So the next time your throat feels a little sore and you reach for a pill without thinking twice, remember what that same moment used to require. Days of uncertainty. A community deciding whether to help you or protect themselves from you. A healer searching memory for a plant that might or might not actually work. No answer, no lab, no name for the invisible thing moving through your body, only pattern, memory, and a stubborn will to survive that has been passed down, unbroken, for tens of thousands of years, and now lives quietly inside you. Tonight, whether you ever get sick again or not.